Good afternoon. It's January 17th, 2022 in Baltimore, Maryland, where I am coming to you from. And what I'm recording is a slightly expanded version of a talk first given last April for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's virtual conference. The presentation should take about an hour, but it is carefully divided into 5 major sections, each dealing with a question or group of related questions that will convey my title, Witty Numbers, Ben Jonson's Shakespeare First Folio in Jest, in focus. First Folio, Jest in focus. So let's begin with a perhaps obvious but easily overlooked point. For Elizabethan or Jacobean readers, there was no reason to bother with a book in which the most interesting meaning was the most obvious one. Reading was a labor that required concentrated attention. A worthy text returned an enlarged understanding with each encounter. Books were not only written, but designed and built to last hundreds of years, not to be discarded when the next theory arrived. Furthermore, smart books talked to one another, and smart readers could overhear the details required to understand a truth. Now, overhearing the details that lead to a truth could take work. Renaissance rhetoricians, poets, and philosophers practiced what Winston Churchill preached: the truth must be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies. Anything else, they thought, and they had scripture for it, was to throw pearls to swine. And there is one man, one writer, who of all others who lived during Shakespeare's lifetime and was privy to all the literary gossip of the day, who was the acknowledged grand master of the practice of esoteric reasoning in verse. His name was Ben Jonson, honest Ben Jonson, as he preferred to be called, and he's the man who wrote the verses that accompany Shakespeare's face, which you see here. Now, according to Shakespeare traditionalists, there is no Shakespeare authorship question. Ben Jonson, they say, must be answered first. This assumes that Ben Jonson has been correctly understood, which is the premise I would submit that is in question. I contend that Ben Jonson cannot be answered until he is first understood. And yet Jonson is still a foreign planet to the average Shakespeare scholar. Let's visit the planet and see what we could find. Who was Ben Jonson? What was the world that he lived in England of the late 16th and early 17th centuries? Well, Jonson, whose dates you see here, in Shakespeare studies is a central person of interest for several reasons. First of all, he's the author of more than 16 plays, 26 masques, and 3 volumes of poetry, as well as the first English grammar, and arguably, I think, England's first really official poet laureate. He's the most distinguished and important literary witness to Shakespeare. There's a lot of disagreements about fundamental elements of fact pattern when it comes to Shakespeare and the biography of the man that wrote the works. But I hope that we can all agree that this, at least, is correct. He is the most distinguished and important literary witness to Shakespeare. He wrote 2 poems, 2 introductory poems in the 1623 Shakespeare First Folio, which is the collected works of the 36 plays having been brought together and published for the first time. Was he the editor of the 1623 folio? Well, he was, at least I would argue, the architect and designer of the folio's preliminary materials. Trained by William Camden at Westminster, he was not only a successful playwright and poet, but generally considered one of the top classical scholars of his day. Jonson was remembered also by his followers and fellow poets as John Cleveland puts it, as the most proportioned wit. Jasper Mayne remembers him as the Prince of Numbers. Thomas Cartwright as the great soul of numbers. And Robert Waring as the author of authors. Now, these curious attributes are often avoided by modern Jonson scholars who they and we seemingly have no objective correlative by which to measure their aptness. And what does it mean that Jonson was called the great soul of numbers who doth in numbers lie following his decease? Why is he lying in numbers? Well, this is the title page of Jonson's 1616 book of epigrams. And we're going to talk in a minute about what an epigram is. Most of you probably know that, but we'll review it. This talk is a study in what are called paratexts. That is the preliminary matters of a book, including title pages, dedications, engravings, etc. According to the literary historian Gerard Genet, who coined the term, a paratext is, quote, more than a boundary or a sealed border. It is rather a threshold, a zone between text and off text. Now, a paratext can have several purposes. One is just to advertise the content in a way that solicits the reader's attention, as in, the dust jacket of a book. But in early modern books, elements of a paratext often functioned as what Annabelle Patterson terms entry codes, deliberate cues crafted to shape the reader's expectation and possibly to invite attention to otherwise neglected elements of detail in the work as a whole. No one was better at this game than Ben Jonson. So let's review a few intriguing points about this title page of the epigrams. First of all, Jonson puts the phrase "the author" materially on the title page, emphasizing his agency and control through the superfluous expression, possibly the first time this was done in any English book. And you're asking, why am I calling it superfluous? That's because at the same time, Jonson paradoxically shrinks his full name to his initials BI. So all you really need here to identify an author is BI, but it's been coupled with the phrase "the author" very conspicuously. What do initials do? They condense the force of a name and to some extent encrypt it, just in the same way that epigrams are expected to condense and perhaps encrypt satirical commentary. Initials are a form of nickname. So in his dedication of his epigrams to William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, Jonson traverses unprecedented literary territory. This is the same book now, when he mixes epigrams and cryptograms. Literally, the word he uses is cipher, which we'll come to in a minute. In 1616, Pembroke, pictured here, was the newly minted Lord Chamberlain of King James's household, and therefore the most powerful theatrical official in England. He was also the richest man in England and the most vigorous arts patron across many media and genres, including drama. Pembroke's brother Philip Herbert was married to the youngest daughter of Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, thought by some to have been the real Shakespeare. Jonson would remember this aristocratic association in part through the gift of a copy of Plato from the 18th Earl, which was given to him sometime between 1617 and 1623. So this is what Jonson writes to this very important man. "My lord, while I cannot change your merit, I dare not change your title. It was your merit that made your title, and not I. Under which name, under the name of your merit, I here offer to your lordship the ripest of my studies, my epigrams, which though they carry danger in the sound, do not therefore seek your shelter." In other words, your protection from potential carping critics who may feel offended by what Jonson has written. "For when I made them, I had nothing in my conscience to the expressing of which I did need a cipher." But before we go on, what's an epigram? Well, it's a short, witty poem not usually as short as the one I'm going to show you here, but not long, often of a satiric character, concluding in a point. It should be terse, pointed, and witty with a sting or a bite. In this example from Jonson's epigrams, epigram 77 to one that desired me not to name him, the sting is apparently directed against the speaker, who is ashamed to have the addressee thought my foe, but paradoxically obeys the addressee's wish not to name him. To one that desired me not to name him, be safe, nor fear thyself so good a fame that anyway my book should speak thy name. For if thou shame ranked with my friends to go, I am more ashamed to have you thought my foe. And I think it would generally be agreed among most Jonson scholars that the epigram's addressee remains to this day unknown, or at least uncertain. And what about the word cipher? The complexity of the word cipher is shown by the fact that the most obviously applicable definition to Jonson's use only ranks 5th in the OED, a secret or disguised act of writing. But at root, a cipher is a zero, an absence. Thus, we can conclude, I think, that the very mention of a cipher in Jonson's dedication invites curiosity, while the entire statement declares an innocence that contradicts everything that is known about the famously canny and elusive Jonson. While Jonson is claiming to Pembroke that his motives are so pure he has no need of any secret or disguised manner of writing, his long history of legal troubles and literary evasions justifies seeing the denial as an ironic pose and a defensive maneuver of the artist against a potentially malevolent audience. In fact, the best Jonson scholars tell us that Jonson is obsessed with the theme of secrecy. Here is William Slights from his 1994 University of Toronto book, Ben Jonson and the Art of Secrecy. As I have struggled with the interpretive problems of Jonson's middle plays over the years, I have become convinced that the driving social force, distinctive dramatic techniques, and persistent interpretive puzzles in these plays are related in one way or another to the topic of secrecy, writes Slights. There was, of course, a reason why Elizabethan and other Jonson and other Elizabethans and Jacobeans were obsessed with secrets and fascinated by ciphers. In a word, the rack. Here is Lucy Baldwin Smith from her classic Treason in Tudor England. Secrecy was a social and political obsession which was regarded as one of the basic laws of nature. For the whole world knew that wild beasts dwell in dens, fishes bed in mud, and birds in nests, and a wise man is wrapped up in secrecy. And that brings us to our second set of questions. What is the Shakespeare First Folio anyway? And how, given what we have seen already, what little we have already learned about Ben Jonson's background, his affinities, his attitudes towards his literary craft, how should we read his role in the folio's creation? So let's get a few basic points down here. Of course, the Shakespeare First Folio is among the most iconic books in the world. You will see images like this one reproduced all over the internet. This book is an object of intensive scholarly inquiry for well over 200 years. The tercentenary of its publication was celebrated in 1923, and the quadricentenary is going to be, I think I pronounced it correctly that time, the first time, is going to be in 2023, something we have to look forward to. Now, this book is also the subject of a major, heavily funded Pulitzer Library tour in 2016, celebrating the death of the alleged author in 1616. So now we know a little bit. Oh, maybe there's one more bullet point here. Yes, this is the most important bullet point of all. And that is, whatever one thinks about the artistic merits or deficiencies of the image that we're looking at, I think one has to acknowledge that this is a striking and memorable design. It looks out at you. It makes you want to pay attention to it. It makes you think it's odd, but you have to look at it first to have to pay attention to it first. Okay, so now we know a little bit about Ben Jonson and the Folio. Jonson lived in an age of paranoia and few books designed to last. He writes books about cryptograms and books of epigrams, and he was the most proportioned wit and wonder of a learned age. So let's look at what he did. So our first layer of context for reading this poem, which is our primary objective here, is a literature review. We must correct or at least question some doubtful statements made by a number of prestigious scholars regarding this document. Not only must Jonson be answered first, but according to Robert Giroux, for example, he is unanswerable. Here's Giroux's quote in a little bit more detail from the New York Times of February 13th, 2000. Ben Jonson is the unanswerable argument against idiotic beliefs that Shakespeare's plays were written by somebody else, like the Earl of Oxford. Unanswerable. Let's keep that standard in mind as we discover what Jonson says in the poem. To the reader, this figure that thou here seest put, it was for gentle Shakespeare cut, wherein the graver had a strife with nature to outdo the life. Oh, could he but have drawn his wit as well in brass as he hath hit his face, the print would then surpass all that was ever writ in brass. But since he cannot, reader, look not on his picture, but his book. So just to show you that the prejudice expressed by Robert Giroux in 2000 is not an anomaly, here's a more recent quotation from Ian Donaldson, Professor Ian Donaldson, who writes into his 2011 biography of Jonson, vouching for the fact that Martin Droeshout's engraving was indeed for gentle Shakespeare cut, and to the lasting confusion of those wishing to propose an alternative authorship, that the person depicted was indeed responsible for the works presented in this volume. Now, Professor Donaldson is described by The Guardian as, quote, a leading Jonson scholar for decades and an editor of the 2013 7-volume Cambridge edition of Jonson's works. But despite these impressive credentials, I personally do not think the skeptics are as confused as Professor Donaldson supposes. Like so many others, Donaldson has been content to tackle the problem of Jonson's epigram by expressly ignoring all the difficult bits. Jonson calls Droeshout's engraving a figure in the first line. The second word is figure. And in various other respects, he undermines our confidence in its own smoothly polished surfaces, drawing attention both to the engraving and to itself as objects that have been cut and put, like games like cards in a game in which Jonson seems to be holding some invisible cards. So I'm going to propose to you that there is in fact a secret message hiding here in plain sight. So let's look at a few examples to show how strangely miscoordinated or bizarre the leading design elements of this book really are. So first of all, this presentation of a book or an author is abnormal for 1623. First of all, Jonson's verses are facing and become the first element in the book. They're facing the title page. They're literally placed before the title page, that is the figure hysteron and proteron, the cart before the horse. And as Puttenham in The Art of English Poesy, or whoever the author of The Art of English Poesy really is, says, the cart before the horse, the preposterous. More obviously, the title page includes an image of the author. Now, in 1623, this was both unprecedented and expensive, requiring 2 runs through the press, one for the image and the other for the text. And notice, even just looking at this, because I'm going to give you some greater detail in just a minute, how square and spare this image is. It is a figure ostensibly without artifice and yet conspicuously put there, inviting deconstruction. One of the few scholars to offer a close reading of these first folio preliminaries is Leah Marcus, a past president of the MLA and professor of literature and Jewish studies at Vanderbilt University, in her 1988 book, Puzzling Shakespeare. Her statements, which I will quote on this slide, provide a good place to begin in assessing the effects the folio paratexts would have likely generated on an early modern authorship, readership. First of all, the folio preliminaries are iconoclastic, she says, Protestant and rhetorically turbulent. She says, and this is a quote, Jonson's poem abolishes Shakespeare as an entity apart from his writing. And finally, in my favorite quotation, I think from all of the scholarship of about Jonson's poem and the first folio paratexts, she says that the conjunction of Jonson's poem and the Droeshout image set the reader off on a treasure hunt for the author. Where is the real Shakespeare to be found? Thus, I would submit to you, leading Orthodox scholars agree with post-Stratfordians that the authorship question actually does originate in the first folio. And while Marcus does not say so, she would probably agree that this rhetorical turbulence that she sees here is a mirror of the rhetorical turbulence of Anglo-Spanish relations in the early 1620s. During the months the folio was being printed, England was on the grip of a constitutional crisis. So let's consider a little bit about that. But before we get to the constitutional crisis, let's look at the design of the folio in context with a typical title page of the day, Jonson's own 1616 folio. And this will help us to grasp the appropriateness of Professor Marcus's designation of the folio as iconoclastic. Looking at Jonson's title page here, notice the ornate decorative character, the creation of three-dimensional spaces, and the close integration of text and word and their complementarity, and indeed the architectural feeling for the whole title page. Those elements, although perhaps less obvious, are also here in Jonson's own authorial self-presentation. Notice that in contrast to the two-dimensional flatness of Shakespeare here, the Jonson image is contained within a three-dimensional space that's created by the design. And again, the text and image are fully integrated, whereas here they are facing on opposite pages. So a similar contrast can be illustrated with literally dozens of early modern title pages. But just to look at one, you may be thinking maybe Drozow was a bad artist. Well, here we can test that proposition because both of these images are by Martin Droeshout. On your left is Droeshout 1632 engraving for a book, and that's, by the way, is the younger, Martin Droeshout the younger. I think that's been established pretty well. On the facing page to the folio is his 1623 1632 engraving for a book by the Bishop of Durham, John Housen. It shows a mastery of technical detail. The three-dimensional space created by the trimming oval and the plinths. Let's see, is there a way for me to get my, can I get a, yeah, I got a laser pointer. Okay, you can see the three-dimensional characterization here, and again the trimming oval with the text in it. All these things accent the realism of this engraving and contrast to the flat and iconoclastic impression of the Droeshout. Now you could say, well, maybe he just got better, possibly, but I don't really think that's what's going on. I think the Droeshout was intended to look like this, and Droeshout was already damn good in 1623. So this and numerous other examples show that the strange design of the authorial image in the first folio cannot really be attributed to some imaginary deficiency in Droeshout's technical skill. So let's talk a little bit about the Spanish marriage crisis that I've mentioned and how that's relevant to the folio. As one scholar of the crisis, Alexander Sampson, explains, while 1623 may be, for Shakespeare scholars, above all, the year of the first folio, for contemporaries, the importance and influence of the Hispanic world on English Renaissance culture would never have been in doubt. Going back to his ascension to become the monarch of the United Kingdom in 1603 and 1604, James was already ambitious to become a peacemaker on the world stage by reconciling Protestant and Catholic churches through marriage. Starting within a year after the death of his popular eldest son, Prince Henry, in 1612, James began planning to marry his second son and heir, Charles, to the Spanish Infanta Anna Maria, the heir to the Catholic Habsburg monarchy. In the same year, mind you, in 1613, he married his daughter Elizabeth to Frederick of Bohemia, the future Elector Palatine, and therefore heir to the leadership of the Protestant forces of Central Europe. Now, whether James was idealistic or mad depended upon your perspective. But by 1623, the king's desire seemed on the verge of controversial fulfillment when Charles and the Duke of Buckingham traveled incognito during the printing of the folio to Spain in order to pursue the match. So at the time of the folio's publication, the two folio dedicatees, Pembroke and his brother Montgomery, the two sons of Mary Sidney, along with Henry de Vere, who is pictured here in this image in the front, and Henry Roseley in the back, and William Stanley, the 6th Earl of Derby, these five men formed the backbone of opposition to the Spanish match among the aristocracy. In the months leading up to the folio printing, the political scene in England was spinning out of control over the marriage. In January 1622, King James dissolved Parliament, ripped the House of Commons protestation out of the Commons Journal on the floor of Parliament and shredded it with his own hands before ordering the imprisonment of its principal author, Sir Edward Coke. I don't know if that name should be Coke or Cook. Someone will tell me, no doubt. A few months later, in April, Henry de Vere, the son of the 17th Earl of Oxford and one of the leaders of the popular opposition to the match, was jailed for the second time. De Vere would remain in the Tower for over 18 months, only being released in December 1623. The Spanish ambassador Gondomar wrote to the King of Spain, expressing his fervent wish that De Vere's head, quote, would be cut off, unquote. During these same 18 months, starting sometime between February and April, Jaggard's printing presses were at work printing the Shakespeare First Folio. The book first appeared in the bookstalls of St. Paul's Churchyard in November 1623, just a few weeks before De Vere was released from the Tower. So let's look a little more closely at our document. Now that we're sort of building in some context here, I guess that doesn't allow me to do that. Let me put the laser away. Okay. So just a few general points about what we're looking at here. This is a 10-line epigram. It's in iambic tetrameters, which means it has 4 iambs, da-dun, 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 in each line. This is a very unusual form in English poetry of this day. To my knowledge, Jonson only uses it in 2 other places, both places where characters in a play are reciting essentially facetious and fake love poetry. It's not an uncommon form in Spain, where it was called a decima, and I'm indebted to Gabriel Reedy for pointing this out to me. So it appears that Jonson is somehow using a form of verse that would immediately recall to the literate person of 1623 Spain and Spanish literary conventions. In contrast to the Spanish conventions, this is printed in a clean Dutch typeface, not seen elsewhere in the book. So let's just remember and bear in mind that Spain and Holland are essentially, Spain and Protestant Holland are at war with one another as Jonson is doing this. It's a curious juxtaposition of elements. So duplicity or doubleness is thematic in this poem. We're going to read it together in just a minute, or did we already read it? I can't remember. Allusions to engraving and card playing in the poem suggest self-referentiality, as Julie Bianchi has noted. And finally, of course, as we've seen, this is written by the Prince of Numbers, the great soul of numbers, a man who is not another copyist, but who was the author of authors. So I would say that the combination of the Dutch type and the Spanish form of the verse suggests that even in this preliminary aspect of the folio, the first thing the reader will see, along with the title page and the Droeshout, Jonson is already symbolizing the great geopolitical divide between the Habsburg policy and the determination of Dutch and English Protestants to remain independent of the Roman Catholic Church. Jonson himself, of course, was, or at least had been, what we would call a constitutional Catholic. That is, a Catholic who had no interest in supporting a counter-reformation and simply wanted to be free to practice his Catholic faith as a minority religion within a country that was now majority Protestant. So in response to these geopolitical pressures, Jonson, I would suggest, is tendering a game of wits here. The card-playing metaphors are clues to Jonson's darker purpose. Let's deal the cards and see what we find. And that brings us to part 3, the solution. Now that we've seen the context, what exactly did the Prince of Numbers do? Now, some of you may have seen Alexander Waugh's excellent treatment of what I'm about to show you in this video called Ben Jonson Knew, which is available along with many other fine videos by Alexander Waugh on YouTube, some of which have had over 80,000 views. So you may know about this, but it's important to me to tell you the backstory. Neither Alexander Waugh nor I is the originator of what I'm about to show you. Instead, this person, American novelist Charlotte Armstrong, figured it out in her 1969 thriller, 7 Seats to the Moon. And I find Ms. Armstrong's involvement in this story to be one of the most fascinating aspects of the whole thing. Others may disagree, and there may be some who believe that novelists by definition are not scholars and therefore don't count. Their opinion doesn't count, and they may be mocked and ridiculed for presuming to have an opinion. I would submit that such readers need to study Kevin Gilvari's 2018 Routledge Press history of the genre of Shakespeare biography, The Fictional Lives of Shakespeare. the fictional lives of Shakespeare. Traditional biographies of Shakespeare, Gilvari shows, have always been a kind of quote unquote official fiction. Perhaps then there is some karmic justice when intransigent experts are outwitted by an eccentric grandfather in a popular suspense novel by an underestimated American novelist. And you see the two key points here. She's quite a prolific writer and a committed Shakespeare authorship researcher, according to her children, who are quite proud of her legacy, naturally. She passed away in 1969, the same year that Seven Seats to the Moon was published, which may be why we, 79, 89, 99, 50 years later or so, still are trying to catch up with her. So only two steps are required to solve the puzzle as she did it. In the novel, the eccentric father of the protagonist, J. Middleton Little, is an amateur scholar who outwits Jonson's protective carapace and shows his solution to his son. The first step is mark the feet. And by the way, I encourage you to make use of your own copy of the poem or the handout distributed with this lecture to do this yourself, to follow the logic by marking out the feet for yourself and then counting. This is what I first did when I read of Armstrong's analysis of the poem, because I wanted to see, well, how does this really work? Just what do you see? Just where do you see this cipher, Father? Jay asked gently. You know what a poetic foot is? Here. Slash those lines into feet, 4 to a line. Here, I've done it. Jay looked at the paper on which his father had done it. And by the way, I'm reproducing you the text from the book under fair use doctrine, and also with the permission and encouragement of the Armstrong estate. So here we see 4 feet per line. So we've got a total of 40 feet here that have all been marked out. That's the first step. Now, the second step is to use the key to extract the feet that contain the message. Now, said his father, pointing to the signature, B is the second letter in the alphabet. I and J, in those times interchangeable, make up the 9th letter. 9 and 2 add up to 11, you will agree. So count to the 11th foot, extract it. And from that, count to the 9th foot following, extract it. Count 11 more, then 9. It is not, his father mourned, to be attacked as an improper cipher. Reason tells me so. Jay did what he had been told to do and read off the result. Vere had his wit. Vere writ his book. Well, well, Jay was impressed. Now we have to give a little background here. Gematria, a word I've used here, gematria is the science and theory of the equivalence of numbers and letters. This ancient practice, as the name implies, is actually closely associated in intellectual history with geometry, which literally means the measuring of the earth. It was an ancient practice used not only by Hebrew scholars, but by intellectuals of many faiths and traditions, as well as a foundational concept in the theory of cryptography. In Judaism, gematria is the mathematical aspect of the more general practice and theory of Kabbalah, a word that means reception or correspondence. So we learn here, as well as in our text, that 11 is going to be a significant number in Jonson's puzzle. That's going to be on the quiz, but before we get there, let's place this modern decryption in a more thorough historical context. Armstrong's solution is anticipated by a similar method of distributing the encoded plain text within a larger textual matrix, originally with a device known as a Cardano Grille. This device is invented by the great Renaissance polymath Jerome Cardan, who is known to many as the author of Cardanus Comfort, a book of consolation, translated into English and published with a dedication to the Earl of Oxford in 1573. The Cardano Grille pictured here is from this book, Della Porta's 1563 De Furtivis Literarum Notis. I translated it here concerning the concealed notes of literary things. It's a tough phrase to translate, and I'm not sure I did justice to it there, but that gives you the idea. This book, originally published, as I said, in 1563, is still in 1623, a state-of-the-art cryptography manual and the book in which Jonson would most likely have learned about a Cardano Grille in. So the Cardano Grille functions by using a pair of identical templates like this that have cutouts in them. And one is in the possession of the sender and the other is in the possession of the recipient. And the encrypted message is first inserted by writing in each of the open spaces, or as many of the open spaces as you need to use, through the template, and then removing the grille. The sender would then complete an innocent surface text by filling in the gaps, you know, from here to here and here to here and here to here, et cetera, with a credible surface text. So reading the encrypted message in that case is as simple as superimposing the second grille over the document. But for those without it, the encrypted message is secured by the appearance of innocence in the cover text. And from a technical point of view, for code buffs, this is a form of steganography, concealed writing, something that is not just encrypted, but actually is given the appearance of a normal and unsuspicious document. So Ben Jonson knew of and almost certainly owned this book, as is hinted in his 1623 poem, The New Cry, which is a complaint against Jonson's superficial critics, who he says buy the names of books that they've never read and who think they know more than they do or Jonson does about secrets of state. The New Cry, and this is a few lines from a much longer poem, of course. Or every day, someone at Rhymey's looks or Bill's, and there he buys the names of books. They all get porta, there's porta, for the sundry ways to write in cipher and the several keys to ope the character. And they've found the slate with juice of lemons, onions, piss to write. They break up seals and close them. Now, Rhymey and Bill's are both booksellers. Bill's actually was a very important bookseller who traveled abroad to buy books for the Bodleian Library. That's John Bill. Used here, I believe, in a pun, actually, quite interestingly. So there seems to be two possible interpretations of this poem. Does Jonson satirize the fashionable readers of Porta because he himself scorns the very concept of secret writing? That's possibility number one. Or is he just a smarter cryptographer than they are, one able to employ more sophisticated methods than easily broken systems involving invisible writing with the juice of lemons, onions, or piss? Everything we know about Jonson suggests that the latter interpretation is more plausible. To give you one example, he was an insider and eventually government witness in the 1605-06 gunpowder plot. And he probably knew about documents in the case written in invisible ink, in this case, orange juice. Such documents were discovered, according to Herford and Simpson. Maybe it should be Herford and Simpson. That the size of the paper, according to them in their biography of Jonson, the size of the paper and the smallness of the apparent contents roused suspicion. And the letters were examined and used in evidence against Garnet. In other words, there was a big sheet of paper with only a little tiny bit of writing on it, and the rest was all in invisible ink, and it looked like a blank sheet of paper, not a plausible cover for a document produced in a society where paper is very expensive and people used it sparingly. Jonson, I think we can conclude, was a knowledgeable practitioner of secret writing, however you're going to define that term. Now, Jonson's cipher could have been created with a Cardano Grille of the type mentioned in Della Porta, as this slide illustrates. And I think I have to put this down again to get my bullet points. So the reader, the phrase "to the reader" is followed with a twice encrypted identification of the author as someone named Vere. Using the Cardano Grille, the poem is constructed by first filling in the cutouts, as we discussed, with the encrypted message, and then removing the grille and composing the rest of the poem around these key phrases. But I think that what Jonson has done here is to modify the Cardano Grille by using poetic meter as his structural device. No grille is needed because the form will supply the template. And this is what this looks like. If instead of a template, Jonson uses the 4x10 metrical structure of the poem. Remember, we have 10 lines of 4 feet per line. And his own initials, BI, as the numerical key to count the metrical feet. Vere had is the 11th foot. His wit, 9 feet further, the 20th foot in the poem, 11 more, Vere writ, and the last one with 9 more at his book. And of course, this comes out working from beginning to end because the sum total of 2 11s and 2 9s is 40, the number of feet in the poem. Now, Jonson's approach eliminates the Cardano Grille and uses the power of poetic number and enumeration to key his cipher. In Jonson's 1606 Masque, Hymen, the title character, instructs that the revolt of humors may be quelled through the deployment of number as a force for reason. The 4 untempered humors are broke out and with their wild affections go about to ravish all religion. If there be a power like reason left in that huge body or little world of man, from whence these came, look forth, and with thy bright and numerous flame instruct their darkness, make them know and see in wronging thee, they have rebelled against thee. And this is a difficult verse here, but the key point here is that Jonson or Hymen in the Masque proposes to reconcile the humors, to tame the humors through the use of number. And the phrase numerous flame is glossed by Jonson as alluding to the opinion of Pythagoras, who held that all reason, all knowledge, and all discourse of the soul were mere number. Now, the association between number and reason, as originally taught in the 6th century BCE school of Pythagoras and his followers, was alive and well in early 17th century England and was held by Jonson and his close associates as a key to esoteric doctrine, especially as expressed in poetry, which when Jonson is called the Prince of Numbers, that means he's the Prince of Poetry also, because to write numbers was to write poetry. So in other words, number had become a resource for communicating ideas that required some type of concern for who's able to read it and who's not able to read it. The literary theorist and close confidant of Michael Drayton, Henry Reynolds, explains this idea in his 1632 Mythomystes. Ancient philosophers and poets, Reynolds writes, had passed down by word of mouth and by successive reception. There's that word that connects Reynolds to the concept of Kabbalah, the art of mystical writing by numbers, and by such means rendered, quote, hidden and disguised, even the letters themselves that form the precepts of the law. Now, the image of Pythagoras here is a 1926 painting by Augustus Knapp, but it accurately conveys the long tradition of Pythagoras's prolific influence in several fields of arts and inquiry. And the book is by Arthur Melzer, a political scientist and historian of ideas who has a lot to teach to Shakespeare studies. I was going to give a quote there from him and I forgot to do it. So Jonson's method is superior for his purposes and generally more flexible than the well-known Cardano Grille, which requires the cryptographer to pass a physical duplicate grid to the recipient. Jonson instead made his own initials the doorway and entrance to the solution to his surface question, where is the real author to be found? And before we finish up here, we should note that this strategy has symbolic implications about the author BI. So Jonson uses his own initials as the key, and in the simplest gematria formula, which we can see pictured here, notice that A is 1 and B is 2 and C is 3. This doesn't have to be this way. These are rotating wheels, and so you can turn one against the other, and you could actually set the alphabet to any particular combination of numbers. But this is the sort of default starting place for gematria, is that A equals 1 and B equals 2. So now together, of course, 2 and 9 make 11, and some have objected that this simple operation of adding 2 and 9 is some type of an ad hoc or creative step of the sort that Friedman and Friedman in the Shakespeare ciphers examined have warned us against. As we shall see, however, Jonson and his first folio colleagues anticipated this objection and collaborated to produce a masterpiece of numerical design for the folio. 11 is, as we shall see, encoded in multiple ways into the design of the first folio paratexts. So let's take a look at that. So in considering the objection that adding 2 and 9 is some sort of a unnecessary, uncalled for step that's very subjective, I compiled data on the numerical structure of all 5 paratextual poems in the first folio, with the results that are shown in these 2 tables, including counts for both line numbers and feet. Excepting Jonson's Droeshout epigram, the other verses are all in iambic pentameter, as is shown here and here. And all of them have 5 feet per line, as showed here and here. I hope that shows up now. The results show that Jonson and his first folio colleagues, Hugh Holland, Leonard Digges, and I.M., almost certainly James Maybe, anticipated our question and have collaboratively constructed an answer through the numerical structure of the whole. A review of the arithmetic structure of the entire sequence of folio paratexts, as shown here, supplies, I believe, a definite proof of Jonson's method. We can start from Ben Jonson's poems here, and we see that the total number of feet in these 2 poems is 440. 440 metrical iambs or feet, a number which multiplies 11 by 40, 40 being the number of feet in the 10-line epigram from which we began our analysis. This is already impressive, but look what happens when we study the rest. This structure is echoed in the cumulative contributions of Holland, Digges, and Mabe, which total 220 feet, exactly half the number of feet used by Jonson. Of these 220 feet, exactly half, the 110 supplied by Holland in his 22-line poem, further echo and establish the foundational nature of the numbers 11 and 22, along with 4, 10, and 40 in the construction of these poems and the design of the entire folio. In my opinion, this cannot be a coincidence. And if you disagree, I'd like to hear from you. And that takes us to our 4th question: why Vere anyway? Now, some of you will have, of course, anticipated the answer to this question, but for those of you who are somewhat new to the topic, let's explain. If you follow me so far, I'm grateful for your attention. However, we must address this remaining question: why Vere anyway? To whom or what might Vere refer? Early in 7 Seats to the Moon, Jay's father struggles with the problem, and by page 111 has part of the answer, but still does not know what Vere means. As you know, his father said, I have yet to find the name complete. The first syllable I know. The second continues to elude me. At that point in the narrative, Jay's father still thinks that Vere is the first syllable of a two-syllable name like virtue. Now, if this is where I was a leading Stratfordian scholar, I'd be tempted to say poppycock, tommyrot. Using historical facts without knowledge and understanding is dangerous and foolish. And besides, I could as easily prove that Jonson's Vere refers to Vermont or Vere mints as it does to anyone alive in 1623. In 1969, Jay's father hadn't heard of Vere mints, which may have been an advantage. Someone named Vere, however, was introduced to the Elizabethan reading public in a big, but probably not the first time, in a big way, but probably not for the first time, in Tom Nash's 1594 topical pastoral play, Summer's Last Will and Testament. Here, Vere, meaning spring, is also a nickname applied to the 17th Earl of Oxford. Okay, so Vertumnus says, I will, my lord, Vere, lusty Vere, by the name of lusty Vere, come into the court, lose a mark in issues. Enter Vere with his train, overlaid with suits of green moss, representing short grass, singing a song about the sweet spring. So here, Vere is unquestionably and generally acknowledged to be applied to Nash's close literary associate, the 17th Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere. The painting, of course, is Giuseppe Arcimboldo's magnificent Spring, painted in 1563 and today at the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando in Madrid. Don't imitate my Spanish pronunciation. By 1594, when Nash used it, the pun was an old one. The mid-15th century Rothley poem, inscribed in the Ellesmere Chaucer, an encomium for the 12th Earl of Oxford, puns the name Vere on both Vere, spring, and veritas, truth. It begins, then Vere commandeth April and his showers, where Vere means both spring and Wriothesley's patron de Vere. And this is the point to introduce a note about the pronunciation of the name de Vere. I believe that it is variously pronounced in 16th century England in varying ways, including the Francophonic Vere, rhyming with fair, bear, wear, or Vere, spring, to the anglicized Vere, rhyming with beer or fear. I think we're going to see it in both forms in this period. And we can see some of those rhymes in Jonson's own poem for Sir Horace Vere, Oxford's cousin and famous Protestant commander in the Low Countries and Germany. Here he puns with the words vertu, vers, ver, these made possible by the fact that, of course, W is a double V, reverence, and fear. Okay, so Jonson was very aware of the linguistic potentials of the syllable Vere, and he associates it with the Vere family name, as this poem proves. And finally, for those of you who are somewhat new, in the 21st century, Nash's Vere is enjoying something of a renaissance, with over 9,000 publications arguing, using parts of the fact pattern that are quite different than the one I'm presenting here, but all of them arguing that this man is actually the true author of the Shakespeare works. This is James Warren's excellent, I use this book all the time, 2017 Index to Oxfordian Publications, and it's full of wonderful stuff. Check it out. So we have seen that Jonson modifies the state-of-the-art concept of the Cardano Grille using his own initials as the key for a unique cryptographic system employing metrical feet as the measuring unit for distributing an enciphered plain text into a larger matrix that conceals the hidden message. Hopefully this all makes sense to you and is plausible on its own terms without need for significant modification or addition. Yet there is one more topic to consider that will greatly improve our appreciation for the historical design, the historical subtlety, the historical depth and subtlety, of Jonson's design, the historical depth and subtlety of Jonson's design. And that is the theme of shapes within shapes, or forms within forms. Now, of course, we saw that Jonson's techniques are informed by Porta and by Renaissance ideals of numerical design, but I'm going to argue that it's also an expression of an ancient doctrine, sometimes called the theory of shapes within shapes or forms within forms. And this idea is discussed extensively in Plutarch's 3 essays on the Delphic Oracle. In the Delphic Oracle, in the Oracle at Delphi, Plutarch relates the practice by which the followers of the Oracle wrapped the wise sayings of the Delphic god in containers, quote unquote, containers made of verse. This, more literally and completely, is what Plutarch says. He says the followers of the Oracle were wont to sit about close by the shrine, waiting to catch the words spoken, and then weaving about them a fabric of extempore hexameters. That's a verse line that is used in ancient epic, okay, in Virgil, for example, or other verses or rhythms as containers, so to speak, for the oracles. So this idea of the form within the form is familiar also in Platonic and Neoplatonic works being discussed in Plato's Phaedrus and the Symposium, as well as extensively by the Neoplatonists. But according to Richard W. Peterson, a leading Jonson scholar, Plutarch seems to have been one of Jonson's key sources of doctrine on this topic. Following up on Peterson's insight, let us see how Plutarch's theory matches Jonson's practice. Let's look first at Jonson's use of the idea of forms within forms in his autobiographical poem, An Epistle Answering to One That Asked to Be Sealed to the Tribe of Ben. That is, the tribe of Ben is the cult, the drinking cult, the poetry cult that Jonson gathered about him in his later years. So perhaps let's take a look at this and we'll better understand this idea. This 5th century painted ceramic of a wine drinking cup or kylix shows Hercules voyaging in the cup of the sun. It illustrates Jonson's concept of the idea of nested forms as discussed in Peterson's Poet as Vessel in his book Imitation and Praise in the Poems of Ben Jonson. Drawn from several prominent ancient sources, including the visual arts, the concept is ubiquitous in Jonson's rhetoric. And importantly for Jonson, the human body is the original metaphor for the container. With mine own frail pitcher, what to do? I have decreed, keep it from waves and press, lest it be justled, cracked, made naught or less. Live to that point I will, for which I am a man, and dwell as in my center as I can. Peterson writes about this particular usage of the image of the form within the form, that it is a piece of Jonson's powerful metaphorical use of the bodies of his praised subjects elsewhere in the poet's own rotund shape becomes a frail pitcher, pitching and tossing on the waves of adversity as he plays with several interrelated traditions, mainly classical, about containers and the contents. Finally, the tun or pothole as a container of inspiring wine and truth. Indeed, vessel is the hidden central word in the poem, according to Peterson. Now, this idea may seem strange to us. As the image suggests, however, it was well understood by Athenian artists 2,500 years ago. So the concept was still well understood in the Renaissance throughout Europe, and it was reinforced most spectacularly in Rabelais' riotous parody Gargantua and Pantagruel, in a series of books first published between 1532 and 1564. Here we see the Oracle of the Bottle, as it was first published in 16th century editions of the far-famed chapter 44 of book 5 of the Deeds and Sayings of the Good Pantagruel. In Rabelais explains that the Oracle of the Bottle is an illustrated form of the proverb in vino veritas, in wine truth. Here, the truth is a poem, concealed or not really concealed, but contained in this case within the outer form. And the verse acknowledges that the bottle is full of mysteries, full of mysteries. I'm not going to even try to pronounce the French. Elizabeth Waugeman can help me with that maybe. Now, according to Wikipedia, Rabelais' work was, quote unquote, stigmatized as obscene by the censors of the College de la Sorbonne, and within a social climate of increasing religious oppression during the lead up to the French Wars of Religion, he was treated with suspicion, and contemporaries avoided mentioning this book. Jonson, however, did not avoid mentioning it. And in fact, he built a literary drinking cult around the emblem of Rabelais' bottle with the poem inside of it. If the whole idea still seems strange to you, just think of a fortune cookie, a very literary fortune cookie that requires the discipline of an analyst and the creative talents of a novelist to crack it open. So let's summarize in a chart. The left column here signifies the logic of the external form or the envelope, and then over here are the clues that allow us to interpret the inner message or the inner form. So Jonson's poem says the engraving was for the gentle Shakespeare cut. Cut, emphasis, artifice, card playing. Does for mean not of, in other words, in place of, instead of actually of. The primary Jacobean meaning of gentle in the phrase gentle Shakespeare is actually noble. And then we're told art and nature had a strife. Well, of course they had a strife, because we're dealing with the superimposition of the name of one man on the works of another. So art and nature are fighting one another instead of art expressing nature or revealing nature as it really should be in Jonson's own philosophical framework. And then the envelope or container, just to wrap this up, because of the strife between art and nature, the engraver cannot draw the author's wit. Well, the inner form tells us that's because Vere had his wit, his own wit. Therefore, Jonson's poem says we should look on his book. Well, the inner form tells us that Vere writ his book. And the conclusion that I would draw from this as being almost as inescapable as 2 + 2 = 4 is that the gentle author for whom the engraving was cut was Vere, who had the wit and who writ his own book. So we have explored Jonson's witty numbers from the perspective of the Renaissance cryptographer and reconstructed the method and logic of Jonson's art. To complete our understanding, let us review Ben Jonson's instructions from Plutarch. This is from the Oracles at Delphi. The god employs mortal men to assist him and declare his will, whom it is his duty to care for and protect, so that they shall not lose their lives at the hands of wicked men while ministering to a god. He is not willing to keep the truth unrevealed, but he caused the manifestation of it to be deflected like a ray of light in the medium of poetry, where it submits to many reflections and undergoes subdivisions, and thus he did away with its repellent harshness. Just to take note of a relevant point of context, we know that Ben Jonson owned a copy of Plutarch's collected works in Greek and Latin, published in Paris in 1624. That is according to David McPherson in his bibliography of Jonson's library. Perhaps it was purchased to replace an earlier copy after the fire in Jonson's library the previous year, the same year that the Folio was published. Instead of losing your life, says Plutarch, give your mind to the matter. There were naturally some things which it was well that despots should fail to understand and enemies should not learn beforehand. About these, therefore, the oracle put a cloak of intimations and ambiguities which concealed the communications as far as others were concerned. I take that cloak to be the same as the outer form that Plutarch discusses elsewhere, which concealed the communications so far as others were concerned, but did not escape the persons involved, nor mislead those that had need to know, and gave their minds to the matter. Thank you for giving your mind to the matter. 2023 is coming up. Stay tuned for further information about Ben Jonson, the first folio, Ben Jonson's Tribe of Ben, and his further role as an architect in the first folio, Paratexts. So let me conclude by thanking a few people and organizations, and I'm sure I have left someone out, so I apologize if I left you out, and I should have thanked you. My wife, Shelley Maycock, Alexander Waugh, Donna Bewley, Earl Showerman, Cheryl Egan Donovan, and Jennifer Newton, Charlotte Armstrong herself, AV Productions, Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, Howard Gottlieb Archival Research Center, and family of Charlotte Armstrong, who have been wonderful in supporting the inquiry into this book and Ms. Armstrong's important role really in the history of Shakespeare scholarship. Also Coppin State University and the University of Maryland System and Virginia Tech Libraries. Thank you for your attention. Please, if you like, leave some comments if you have any questions or things that you'd like to point out. Thank you very much.